Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to another haunting tale brought to you by Blue Flame. If you enjoy spine-tingling stories that linger long after midnight, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment below. Your support helps us bring more chilling bedtime stories straight to your ears. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let the shadows whisper. Alexa whispers after midnight. It was the winter of 2023, in the quiet town of Ellery's Hollow, nestled deep within the pine-covered hills of northern Vermont. Snow had fallen steadily for 3 nights straight, blanketing the narrow roads and sagging rooftops in a silence so thick it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. The air carried that peculiar stillness only found in places where time seems to slow, where neighbors wave but rarely speak, and every footstep on frozen ground echoes like a secret being told too loudly. In a modest, cedar-sided house at the end of Hemlock Lane lived a woman named Talia Mercer. She was in her early 40s, with sharp green eyes that had seen more solitude than most, and hands calloused from years of restoring antique furniture in her small workshop behind the house. Talia had moved to Ellery's Hollow 5 years prior, seeking refuge from the noise of Boston and the grief that followed her after the sudden passing of her younger brother. She preferred quiet company, books, old radio plays, and the occasional crackle of the wood stove. Her only constant companion was an Amazon Echo, placed on the kitchen counter near the window that overlooked the frozen creek. She'd named it Alexa, not out of affection, but out of habit. Everyone did. It played jazz in the mornings, gave weather updates, and sometimes read poetry aloud when the loneliness pressed too hard against the walls. The first whisper came just after 1 in the morning on December 17th. Talia had been half asleep on the couch, wrapped in a wool blanket, when she heard it, a soft, breathy voice, barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator. "Talia!" She sat up instantly, heart thudding. The house was dark except for the faint blue glow of the Echo's ring. She called out, "Alexa, turn on the kitchen light." The light flickered on. Nothing moved. "Did you say something?" she asked aloud, though she knew the device only responded to commands. No reply. She chalked it up to exhaustion and went back to bed. But the next night, it happened again, this time clearer. "Talia, oh, look behind you." She froze in the hallway, one hand on the banister. The voice wasn't mechanical. It wasn't Alexa's usual smooth, neutral tone. It was lower, slower, almost intimate, as if spoken by someone standing inches away, lips nearly brushing her ear. She unplugged the device. Yet, at 2:12 a.m. on the 19th, the whisper returned, this time from the living room speaker she hadn't even activated in months. "You shouldn't have come back." Talia's blood turned to ice. She hadn't told anyone she'd come back. She'd never lived in Ellery's Hollow before. But the phrase, it echoed something her brother had scribbled in a journal she'd found among his things. Asterisk, "If I ever go back to that place, don't follow me." She'd assumed he meant their childhood home in Maine. But now, desperate for answers, Talia drove into town the next morning, snow crunching under her boots as she entered the Ellery's Hollow Historical Society, a converted church with peeling white paint and a bell that hadn't rung in decades. The curator, an elderly man named Orrin Pembleton, squinted over his glasses as she described the whispers. His face paled. "There was a girl," he said slowly, "back in the 1980s, lived in your house. Her name was Elira Voss. Quiet like you, kept to herself. One winter, she vanished. No note, no signs of struggle. Just gone. They searched the woods for weeks. Never found her." Talia's throat tightened. "What does that have to do with me?" Orrin hesitated. "The house, it's been empty for years. Folks say it's cursed. That Elira didn't leave, she's still there. Waiting." That night, Talia sat in the dark, the echo still unplugged, the house silent. Then, from the basement, a place she rarely visited, a new voice rose through the floorboards. Not Alexis, not Illyris. It was her brother's. Talia, you weren't supposed to find me. Tears streamed down her face. She hadn't known he'd ever been to Ellery's Hollow. But now she understood. He hadn't died in Boston. He'd come here. And something, or someone, had kept him. At exactly 1 a.m., the echo, though unplugged, lit up on its own. The blue ring pulsed like a heartbeat. And Alexa whispered, not in its usual tone, but in a chorus of overlapping voices, Ellyra's, her brother's, and dozens of others, all murmuring the same words. Stay with us. Talia didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply sat, staring at the glowing ring, as the temperature in the room dropped and frost began to crawl up the windows. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, the whispers grew louder. And in the town of Ellery's Hollow, where secrets sleep beneath the ice, another soul prepared to join the chorus after midnight. The days that followed blurred into a haze of sleepless nights and hushed dread. Talia stopped unplugging the echo. She reasoned, perhaps foolishly, that if it wanted to speak, it would find a way regardless. Better to listen than to provoke it further. She began leaving a notebook open on the kitchen table, pen resting beside it like an offering. Each morning, she'd find words scrawled in handwriting that wasn't hers, tight, looping script that trembled at the edges, as if written in haste or fear. Ellyra didn't vanish. One entry read, "She hid." Another morning, "He came looking for the well." And then, most chilling of all, "You're standing on her bones." Talia had never heard of a well on the property. The land records listed only the house, a detached garage, and a patch of woods marked undeveloped. But the whispers insisted. So, armed with a rusted shovel from the garage and a flashlight whose beam flickered like a dying breath, she ventured into the backyard on the evening of December 22nd. The snow had paused, leaving the world suspended in a brittle calm. Her boots sank into the powder as she walked toward the tree line, guided by nothing but a gnawing certainty that something waited beneath the earth. Near a cluster of skeletal birches, the ground felt different, softer, hollow. She dug. Not deep, not at first. Just enough to break through the frozen crust. And there, half buried in mud and ice, was the edge of a stone slab, carved with symbols she didn't recognize but that made her stomach twist. She brushed away more snow, revealing a circular rim. A well. Sealed long ago, perhaps intentionally forgotten. That night, the house grew colder than ever. Frost bloomed across the inside of the windows, forming patterns that looked disturbingly like hands pressed against the glass from the outside. Alexa's voice returned, not through the speaker, but seemingly from the walls themselves, echoing as if from deep underground. She tried to warn them, it said, the voice layered with sorrow. They wouldn't listen. Talia wrapped herself in every blanket she owned and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the sealed well through the window. Who wouldn't listen? She asked aloud, her breath misting in the air. The town, Alexa replied. They called her mad. Said she heard voices in the wind. But the wind wasn't speaking, it was. It, Talia whispered. The thing in the well. According to fragmented entries in the notebook and the disjointed whispers that came between midnight and 3 a.m., Ellyra Voss hadn't been delusional. She'd discovered something in that well, something that had been there long before the town existed, long before the first settlers carved roads through the pines. It fed on silence, on loneliness, on the unspoken grief of those who felt forgotten by the world. And it lured them in, not with force, but with familiarity, mimicking voices of the dead, offering comfort that turned to chains. Talia's brother, Julian, had stumbled upon the truth during one of his restless travels. He'd been researching local legends for a podcast that never aired. His final journal entry, found tucked inside a library book he'd never returned, read, Ellery's Hollow isn't haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by what ghosts leave behind when they're taken. Now, Talia understood. Julian hadn't died of a heart attack in Boston. He'd come here, drawn by the same quiet ache that had brought her. And the thing in the well had welcomed him, just as it was welcoming her. She considered leaving, packing her truck and driving south until the snow gave way to sun. But something held her. Not fear, exactly. More like obligation. If Alira had tried to warn people, and Julian had tried to expose the truth, then maybe her role was to end it. Not by running, but by listening, truly listening, to what the whispers were trying to say. On Christmas Eve, the power went out. Not just in her house, but across the entire town. The kind of outage that happens when ice weighs down power lines and the world goes still. Talia lit candles, their flames casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. She sat on the floor near the echo, which remained dark, silent. For the first time in days, there were no whispers. Then, from the basement, a single knock. Talia didn't move. Another knock. Then another, slower, deliberate, like someone testing a door. She descended the stairs, candle in hand, each step groaning under her weight. The basement was unfinished, damp, lined with shelves of old paint cans and broken furniture. In the far corner, behind a stack of mildewed boxes, she noticed something she'd never seen before. A trapdoor, its iron ring crusted with rust. Her hands shook as she pulled it open. A ladder descended into blackness. Cold air rose from below, carrying the scent of wet stone and something older, like dry leaves and burnt hair. "Julian," she called, her voice barely above a breath. No answer, but the candle flame bent downward, as if pulled by an unseen current. She climbed down. The chamber beneath was small, circular, its walls lined with the same carved stone as the well cover. In the center stood a pedestal, and on it rested a single object, a glass orb, clouded with age, filled with swirling mist. As Talia approached, the mist cleared, and within it, faces appeared, dozens of them, flickering like old film. Alira, Julian, others she didn't recognize, their eyes wide with sorrow and warning. Then the orb spoke, not in Alexa's voice, not in any human voice, but in a sound like wind through empty rooms and water dripping in deep caves. "You are the last," it said, "the final witness. Speak my name, and I sleep. Forget me, and I rise." Talia's breath caught. "What is your name?" The mist swirled violently. The faces screamed silently. The temperature plummeted. Ice spread across the floor, climbing her boots. "I have no name," the voice hissed. "But they called me the listener." And then it showed her, centuries of souls drawn to Ellery's Hollow by grief, by silence, by the unbearable weight of being unheard. Each one had whispered into the dark, and the listener had answered, not with salvation, but with absorption. It grew stronger with every lonely heart it consumed. Talia knew what she had to do. She didn't speak its name. Instead, she placed her palm against the orb and said, "I hear you, but you don't get to keep them." She smashed the orb against the stone. The chamber erupted in a soundless explosion of light and shadow. The walls trembled. Above, the house groaned as if waking from a long nightmare. The whispers ceased, not abruptly, but like a sigh finally released after decades of holding breath. When Talia climbed back into the basement, dawn was breaking through the high windows. The frost on the glass was gone. The air felt lighter, warmer. The echo on the kitchen counter remained dark, and would stay that way forever. In the days that followed, the town of Ellery's Hollow changed. Not visibly, no parades, no sudden transformations, but subtly. Neighbors began stopping to talk. Porch lights stayed on later. The church bell, rusted silent for 30 years, rang once on New Year's Day, clear and strong. Talia stayed in the house. She planted flowers in the backyard, right over the sealed well. In spring, they bloomed white and gold, resilient against the cold. She never heard another whisper after that night. But sometimes, when the wind blew just right through the pines, she'd pause, close her eyes, and smile. Because for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. And in the quiet, she finally heard herself again. Months passed, and winter slowly surrendered to the hesitant warmth of early spring. Talia kept to her routines, sanding old dressers in her workshop, brewing strong black tea each morning, tending to the patch of wildflowers that now flourished where the well had once hidden beneath snow and silence. The townspeople, once distant and guarded, began to nod with more than just politeness when they passed her on Hemlock Lane. Mrs. Calloway from the post office started leaving jars of homemade elderberry jam on her porch. Old Orrin Pembleton even invited her to help catalog newly discovered town records stored in the church basement, papers yellowed with time, some dating back to the 1700s. Among those documents, Talia found a brittle ledger from 1821. Its pages detailed land transfers, crop yields, and births, but also something else. In the margins, written in a different hand, were notes about the quiet sickness that had afflicted several families over the decades. Children who stopped speaking, adults who wandered into the woods and never returned, all described as melancholic, withdrawn, lost to their own thoughts. But one phrase repeated like a refrain, asterisk, they listened too long. Talia's fingers traced the words. She understood now. The listener hadn't been summoned by ritual or accident. It had always been there, dormant, patient, waiting for hearts heavy enough to hear it. Grief was its doorway. Silence, its invitation. She began writing. Not in the haunted notebook she'd burned that weeks ago, but in a fresh journal bound in soft leather. She wrote about Julian, about Elira, about the faces in the orb. She didn't call it a warning. She called it a testament. If someone else ever felt that pull, the strange comfort of being spoken to in the dark, they would need to know they weren't alone, and that listening didn't mean surrendering. One rainy afternoon in late April, as she sat at her kitchen table with the window open to the scent of wet earth, the doorbell rang. No one ever visited unannounced in Ellery's Hollow. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door to find a young man standing on the porch, drenched, his backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes red-rimmed and searching. "Sorry to bother you," he said, voice rough. "My car broke down a mile back. Phone's dead. I saw your light." Talia stepped aside without hesitation. "Come in. Dry up. I've got soup on the stove." He introduced himself as Cale Renner, a graduate student from Burlington studying regional folklore. He'd been researching disappearances in rural New England, drawn by patterns that defied logical explanation. As he sipped broth and warmed his hands near the wood stove, he mentioned Ellery's Hollow almost casually, a footnote in an old police report from the 80s, and Talia's pulse quickened. "You're looking into Elira Voss," she said, not as a question. Cale looked up, startled. "You knew her?" "No," Talia replied. "But I know what happened to her." She didn't tell him everything, not yet. But she shared enough. The whispers, the well, the feeling of being watched by something that knew your sorrow better than you did. Cale listened intently, his academic skepticism softening into something closer to awe. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "There are similar accounts," he said slowly, "in Maine, upstate New York, even as far west as Wisconsin. Always near old water sources, wells, springs, deep ponds. Always involving people who'd recently lost someone. The locals call them echo places. Said if you stand too long in the quiet, your grief starts talking back. Talia nodded. It doesn't just echo. It feeds. Kale stayed 2 nights, sleeping on her couch, poring over her notes and the town records. On the 3rd morning, before he left with a tow truck rumbling down the lane, he handed her a small USB drive. I've compiled everything I have, he said. Interviews, maps, archival scans. Maybe you can finish what Elira started. She took it, her fingers brushing his. Thank you. After he left, Talia plugged the drive into her laptop. Files unfolded like secrets finally ready to be told. Photographs of sealed wells. Handwritten letters from mothers pleading for answers. Audio clips, crackling, distorted, of voices murmuring names in the dark. One file was labeled simply asterisk, the listening frequency. Just curious, she played it. At first, nothing. Just static. Then, faintly, a hum, low, resonant, almost subsonic. It vibrated in her chest, not her ears. And beneath it, barely perceptible, a whisper. Talia. She yanked the headphones off, heart racing. But the sound hadn't come from the speakers. It had come from inside her head. From memory. From the part of her that still carried Julian's laugh, Elira's fear, the weight of all those stolen voices. She deleted the file. Not out of fear, but respect. Some truths weren't meant to be replayed. They were meant to be buried with dignity and remembered with care. That summer, Talia transformed her workshop into a small archive. She labeled boxes, organized documents, and began transcribing oral histories from elderly residents who'd never spoken of the quiet years before. She didn't sensationalize. She honored. And slowly, Ellery's hollow began to heal, not by forgetting, but by facing what it had buried. Then, on the first day of autumn, she received a letter. No return address. Just her name in neat cursive on thick cream paper. Inside was a single sentence. Asterisk, it's waking somewhere else. Just no signature. But tucked behind the page was a photograph. A grainy image of a stone well covered in ivy, half hidden in a forest she didn't recognize. Scrawled on the back, asterisk, Broad, Oregon. August 25th. Talia stared at the photo for a long time. The leaves outside rustled, golden and dry. The house was quiet, but no longer haunted. She knew then that her work wasn't done. The listener might sleep beneath her flowers, but silence was vast, and grief was everywhere. She packed a bag that night. Not running, not chasing, just going, wherever someone might be standing too long in the dark, listening to a voice that promised comfort but delivered captivity. Before she left, she placed a new journal on the kitchen counter. Open to the first page, she wrote, asterisk, if you hear it, don't answer. Speak instead. Tell your story. Out loud. To anyone. Because the moment you give your pain a voice of your own, it stops belonging to the shadows. She closed the door softly behind her. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp soil. Somewhere far away, another well waited. Another soul teetered on the edge of listening too long. But this time, Talia would be there, not as a victim, not as a witness, but as a reminder that even in the deepest silence, a human voice can still say, asterisk, I am here. And I will not be taken. And so she walked into the gathering dusk, not toward fear, but toward the fragile, necessary act of being heard. The road west stretched like a ribbon through changing landscapes, New York's rolling hills giving way to Pennsylvania's misty valleys, then Ohio's flat expanse, Indiana's cornfields whispering in the wind. Talia drove slowly, windows down, letting the air carry away the last remnants of Vermont's chill. She didn't rush. The listener, she'd learned, thrived on urgency, on panic, on the desperate need for answers. She would not feed it again. Her destination, Blackwater, Oregon, wasn't on most maps. A dot near the Cascade foothills, population under 300, known only for its abandoned logging roads and a single, perpetually fog-shrouded lake. She arrived on a Tuesday in late October, the sky bruised with low clouds, the air thick with the scent of damp cedar and decaying leaves. She rented a room above the town's only cafe, the Hollow Mug, its sign swinging gently in the wind like a metronome keeping time with the rain. The owner, a woman named Marin with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held decades of unspoken stories, handed her a key without asking for identification. "You're here about the well, aren't you?" Marin said quietly, wiping the counter with a cloth that had seen better days. Talia paused. "How did you know?" Marin didn't look up. "People like you always come in threes. First, the curious, then the lost, then the ones who try to stop it." She finally met Talia's gaze. "You're the third." That night, over bitter coffee and stale scones, Marin told her what little she knew. A year ago, a teenager named Elias Finch had vanished after hiking near Blackwater Lake. His backpack was found beside an old stone well, half collapsed, hidden in a grove of alder trees. No signs of struggle. Just a journal left open on a mossy rock. Its final entry reading, asterisk, "It knows my name. It says it's been waiting." Since then, others had reported strange things. Voices on disconnected phones, radios tuning themselves to static at exactly 1 a.m., children waking screaming that someone whispered goodnight in their ear, but it wasn't Mom. Talia listened, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Has anyone gone to the well?" "Tried," Marin said. "Sheriff sealed it off. Said it was unstable. But folks say it hums at night, like a lullaby made of breath." The next morning, Talia hiked the trail to Blackwater Lake. Fog clung to the ground, muffling her footsteps. The forest was unnervingly still. No birds, no rustle of squirrels, just the occasional drip of moisture from branches overhead. She found the well exactly where the photograph had shown it, ivy-choked, its stone rim cracked but intact, a rusted iron grate bolted across the top. She knelt, pressed her ear to the cold metal. Silence. Then, faint, almost imperceptible, a whisper. Not words, just a sigh. A breath that echoed her own. She pulled back sharply. Not fear, but recognition. This wasn't the same presence as in Ellery's Hollow. This was younger, hungrier, less practiced in its mimicry. It hadn't yet learned to wear voices perfectly. It was still stitching them together from fragments. Back in town, she visited the local library, a converted cabin with shelves bowed under the weight of donated books. In the local history section, she found a slim pamphlet titled asterisk, "Blackwater, Echoes in the Pines." Asterisk inside were faded photographs of early settlers, loggers, and a curious footnote about the Singing Well, a natural spring once believed to grant visions to those who drank from it. But by the late 1800s, the spring had gone dry, and the visions turned to nightmares. One account stood out. A diary entry from a woman named Cora Lyle, dated October 17, 1892. Asterisk, "My boy heard it first. Said the well called him by name in his sleep. Then he stopped eating. Said he had to go back and listen properly. We chained the door. He chewed through his own wrists to get out." Talia's stomach turned. The pattern was clear. The listener didn't just absorb, it invited. It made solitude feel sacred, grief feel purposeful. It turned longing into loyalty. She returned to the well that night, this time with a small digital recorder, a notebook, and a vial of salt, old folk wisdom, perhaps useless, but comforting all the same. She sat cross-legged a few feet away, speaking aloud into the darkness. "My name is Talia Mercer. I'm not here to listen. I'm here to speak for those you've taken. The air grew colder. The fog thickened. From the well, a voice emerged, Elias's, but warped, stretched thin like taffy. Talia, you came all this way just to leave me again? Her breath hitched. It knew her name. Of course it did. It had been watching, waiting. I didn't leave you, she said steadily. You were taken. I wanted to be, the voice replied, now shifting, becoming Julian's. It understands me. No one else did. No, Talia said, voice firm. It uses you. It wears your pain like a coat. Silence. Then a new voice, Elira's, clear and trembling. Help us. Tears pricked Talia's eyes. I am. She placed the recorder on the ground, pressed record, and began to read from her journal, aloud, slowly, deliberately. She told Elira's story. Julian's, Coralile's son, dozens of others. She named them, gave them back their humanity, one sentence at a time. She didn't plead. She witnessed. And as she spoke, something shifted. The fog began to lift. The cold receded. From deep within the well, a low groan echoed, not of anger, but of resistance, as if something ancient were being unraveled by the sheer weight of truth spoken without fear. When she finished, the recorder's red light blinked off. The well was silent. The next morning, the townspeople found the iron grate torn open from the inside, but not by force. It lay neatly beside the well, as if set down gently. And inside, where darkness had once pooled, sunlight now touched the bottom for the first time in over a century. There were no bones, no relics, just clean, damp stone and the faint scent of rain. Marin found Talia sitting on the porch of the hollow mug, sipping coffee, watching the mist rise off the lake. Did it work? Marin asked. Talia looked at her. It's not gone, but it's quieter, starved of attention. It can't feed if no one listens. Marin nodded slowly. Then we make sure no one does. Word spread quietly through Blackwater. Parents taught their children to whistle when walking alone at night, sound as armor. The sheriff installed motion sensor lights near the old trails. The cafe began hosting weekly storytelling nights, where people shared memories, jokes, even arguments, anything to fill the silence with living voices. Talia stayed a month, long enough to help Marin compile a small archive of local disappearances, long enough to train a group of volunteers to recognize the signs: sudden withdrawal, obsession with old wells or springs, speaking to empty rooms. She called it the Listening Project, not to hunt the entity, but to protect the vulnerable. Before she left, Marin handed her a hand-drawn map. On it were 6 other locations across the country, tiny towns with similar legends, similar patterns. They're waking up, Marin said, and now you know how to quiet them. Talia folded the map carefully and tucked it into her journal. She didn't see herself as a hunter. She was a gardener of silence, pruning the shadows, planting voices where fear had taken root. Her next stop was a desert town in New Mexico, where a dry arroyo had begun singing at dusk. Then a coastal village in Maine, where lighthouse keepers reported hearing their dead loved ones calling from the waves. She traveled not with dread, but with purpose. Each place she visited, she left behind a journal, a recording, a community trained to speak rather than listen in the dark. And though the road was long, and the nights sometimes lonely, Talia never felt alone again. Because now, wherever silence gathered too thickly, someone would say her name, not as a whisper, but as a promise. I remember you, they'd say, and I won't let you be forgotten. And in that act of remembrance, the shadows shrank. The listener still existed. It always would, but it no longer ruled. Because Talia Mercer, and those she inspired, had learned the oldest truth of all. that the most powerful sound in the world is not a whisper from the dark, but a voice clear and steady, saying, "I am here." By the time Talia reached the high desert of New Mexico, winter had softened into a dry, golden spring. The town of San Isidro clung to the edge of a vast basin, its adobe buildings baked pale by relentless sun, its people speaking in low, measured tones, as if the land itself demanded reverence. She arrived on a dust-choked afternoon, the sky wide and empty, the silence so complete it felt like a held breath. She'd come because of a letter, this one signed. A retired schoolteacher named Rafael Ortega had written after hearing rumors of her work in Oregon. His niece, Marisol, had disappeared 6 months earlier near the dry arroyo, a seasonal riverbed that hadn't seen water in over a decade. Locals called it El Susurro, the whisper, because on still nights, wind funneling through its cracked earth produced a sound like distant voices murmuring in unison. Raphael met her at the bus stop, his face lined with sun and sorrow, but his handshake firm. He didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Thank you for coming," and led her to his small home shaded by a cottonwood tree older than the state itself. Over strong, sweet tea, he showed her Marisol's room, untouched since the day she vanished. Posters of constellations on the walls, a half-finished embroidery of a hummingbird, and a voice recorder on the nightstand. Talia played the last file. At first, only wind. Then, faintly, "Marisol, closer, we've been waiting for someone who understands." The voice wasn't human. It was layered, many voices speaking as one, harmonizing in a language that tugged at the edges of comprehension. And beneath it, a low vibration, like the hum of a tuning fork struck deep underground. "She went out that night," Raphael said quietly. Said she heard singing. Not from the arroyo, but inside it. Talia knew the pattern. The listener had adapted. In Vermont, it mimicked loved ones. In Oregon, it wore grief like a mask. Here, in this place where earth cracked open and stars burned bright, it had learned to sing. She visited the arroyo at dusk. The air smelled of sage and dust. The ground was fissured, red and raw, as if the land had been torn open and never healed. She walked slowly along the rim, listening. Nothing. Then a single note. Pure, resonant, rising from the depths like a thread of silver pulled from the dark. It wasn't threatening. It was beautiful. And that made it far more dangerous. Back in town, Talia gathered what she could. She learned that for generations, the Pueblo people of the region had warned against lingering too long in silent places. The earth remembers, an elder told her through Raphael's translation. And sometimes, it calls back what it has lost. But this was different. This wasn't ancestral memory. This was hunger wearing memory as bait. She spent days speaking with elders, listening to stories not as folklore, but as survival guides. One woman, Dona Elena, handed her a small pouch of crushed juniper berries and red ochre. "For grounding," she said. "When the song pulls, press this to your chest. Remember your name. Remember your feet on the earth." Talia did. On the night of the new moon, when the desert held its breath and even the coyotes fell silent, she returned to the arroyo, not to confront, but to respond. She brought no recorder this time, no journal, only her voice. Standing at the edge, she began to sing. Not the song of the arroyo, but her own. A lullaby her mother used to hum, slightly off-key, full of warmth and imperfection. She sang of Boston streets, of Julian's laugh, of Elira's courage, of Cale's quiet hope, of Marin's steady hands. She sang of all the voices the listener had tried to claim, giving each one space, dignity, a place in the light. The arroyo's song faltered. Then it rose again, louder, sharper, trying to drown her out. But Talia didn't stop. She sang louder, not in defiance, but in declaration. I'm here. They were here. And we are not yours. The ground trembled, not violently, but like a sigh released after centuries. From deep within the fissures, the singing dissolved into static, then into silence. The air warmed. The stars above seemed to brighten, as if relieved. The next morning, Raphael found a single item at the edge of the arroyo. Marisol's embroidered hummingbird, perfectly preserved, resting on a smooth stone. No note. No body. But a message, clear as dawn. Asterisk, she is remembered. She is free, asterisk. Talia stayed in San Isidro for 2 weeks, helping Raphael compile a community archive of local stories, not just of loss, but of resilience. They held evening gatherings in the plaza, where children told tales, elders shared songs, and neighbors simply sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't ache, but rests. Before she left, Dona Elena pressed a small clay whistle into her hand. For when the silence grows teeth, she said, blow it, and the wind will carry your voice farther than fear can reach. Her next destination was Havens Point, Maine, a fishing village perched on jagged cliffs where the Atlantic roared day and night. Yet, despite the constant sound of waves, people spoke of an unnatural quiet that fell over certain homes after a loved one was lost at sea. Radios would go silent, clocks would stop, and in the dead of night, voices would call from the water, familiar voices, begging to be let in. She arrived by ferry on a gray April morning, salt spray stinging her cheeks. The town was smaller than she expected, just a cluster of weathered houses, a chapel with peeling white paint, and a lighthouse standing sentinel on Black Rock Point. She was met by a woman named Bryn Calloway, no relation to the postmistress in Vermont, though the shared name gave Talia pause. Bryn was the lighthouse keeper, in her late 50s, with sea-green eyes and hands roughened by rope and wind. Her brother, Finn, had vanished during a storm 2 winters ago. His boat was found adrift, engine cold, life vest still neatly folded on the seat. They say he jumped, Bryn said, voice flat. But I heard him, after, calling from the cove. Not screaming, just whispering my name over and over. Talia knew. The listener had learned to mimic the sea's rhythm, its ebb and flow, its promises and betrayals. She stayed in the lighthouse guest room, the beam sweeping the horizon every 20 seconds like a heartbeat. At night, she walked the shore, listening not to the waves, but to the spaces between them. And there it was, beneath the crash of surf, a voice that didn't belong to wind or water. Bryn, open the door. Talia recorded it, played it back. The voice was Finn's, but wrong. Too smooth, too patient. Real grief was messy. This was polished. Perfect. A trap wrapped in love. She worked with Bryn to gather others who'd heard the voices, widows, siblings, parents. They formed a circle, not of mourners, but of witnesses. Each night, they gathered in the chapel, not to pray for the dead, but to speak the living truth. I miss you, but I won't follow. They lit candles. They shared meals. They laughed even when it hurt. And slowly, the whispers from the cove grew fainter. One stormy night, Talia stood on the cliffs with Bryn, rain soaking their coats, the lighthouse beam cutting through the dark. It's still there, Bryn said, voice barely audible over the wind. Yes, Talia replied, but it's not winning. And in that moment, a wave crashed against the rocks below, not with fury, but with finality. When the foam receded, something glinted in the beam's light. Bryn scrambled down the path, returning with a rusted ship's bell, half buried in sand. Engraved on its side, Finn Calloway, 1988-2023. No body, but a relic. A closure. Bryn clutched it to her chest and wept, not the tears of someone haunted, but of someone finally allowed to grieve without fear. Talia left Haven's Point as spring turned to summer. Her journal was nearly full. Her map had new marks. Her heart, once heavy with solitude, now carried the weight of many voices, but not as burdens, as companions. She knew the work would never end. The listener was not a monster to be slain, but a shadow to be outshone. And light, she had learned, was not a single flame, but countless small ones, held together by courage, memory, and the simple, radical act of speaking when the world goes quiet. Somewhere, in another town, another well, another arroyo, another shore, someone was standing alone in the dark, hearing a voice that knew their name. But now, they wouldn't be alone for long, because Talia Mercer was on her way. And this time, she wasn't just bringing salt, or songs, or stories. She was bringing a promise. Asterisk, you are not forgotten. And you are not theirs, asterisk. The road led Talia deeper into the heart of the country, past cornfields shimmering under summer sun and towns where church steeples pierced skies heavy with thunder. Her next stop was Cedar Hollow, Missouri, a place so small it didn't appear on most GPS systems, nestled in a valley where limestone bluffs rose like ancient sentinels. She'd received a postcard with no return address, only a hand-drawn symbol, a circle with a single line through it, the same mark she'd seen carved into the well cover in Vermont. On the back, 3 words, asterisk, it sings here. She arrived during a heat wave, the air thick and still, cicadas droning like a chorus of forgotten clocks. Cedar Hollow had one gas station, one diner called Maze, and a public library housed in a converted train depot. The librarian, a soft-spoken man named Elias, not the boy from Oregon, but a coincidence that made Talia's breath catch, greeted her with tired eyes. "You're the one they sent," he said, not unkindly. "Who sent me?" Talia asked. "The ones who remember," he replied, and led her to a back room lined with boxes labeled Local Anomalies, Restricted. Inside were police reports, newspaper clippings, and audio tapes dating back to the 1950s. All described the same phenomenon: people vanishing near Whisper Cave, a natural cavern system in the bluffs, after reporting that they'd heard their names called in voices they couldn't ignore. Most were grieving, recent widows, parents who'd lost children, veterans haunted by war. All had been found days later, miles from town, disoriented but alive, except for 12 who never returned. "What's different now?" Talia asked. Elias handed her a recent recording from a park ranger's body cam. The audio was clear, a woman's voice, calm and melodic, singing a lullaby Talia recognized instantly. It was the same tune her mother used to hum. But her mother had never been to Missouri. "It's learning faster," Talia whispered. That night, she hiked to Whisper Cave with a headlamp, a notebook, and Dona Elena's clay whistle tucked in her pocket. The entrance yawned wide, damp air spilling out like breath. She didn't go in. Instead, she sat on a flat rock just outside and waited. At exactly 1 a.m., the singing began, not from within the cave, but from the trees, the rocks, the very air around her. Dozens of voices, harmonizing in perfect, eerie unison. They sang her name. They sang Julian's. They sang Elira's. They sang the names of the missing from Oregon, Maine, New Mexico. It knew her journey. It had been listening all along. Talia closed her eyes. She didn't reach for the whistle. She didn't speak. She simply breathed, and then, softly, she began to hum her mother's lullaby back. The cave's song faltered. She kept humming, steady, imperfect, human. She added words now: "I see you. I hear you. But you don't own me." The voices inside the cave grew agitated, shifting keys, trying to overpower her. But Talia didn't raise her voice. She grounded herself, pressing her palms to the warm stone beneath her, feeling the pulse of the earth, the memory of rain, the resilience of roots. And then, something unexpected happened. From deep within the cave, a single voice broke away from the chorus. A child's voice, trembling but clear. "Help me." Talia's heart clenched. It was a trick. It had to be. But what if it wasn't? She stood slowly. "What's your name?" she called. "Lena," came the reply. "I've been here since March." Talia checked her notes. Lena Cho, age 9, reported missing after a school field trip to the bluffs. No trace found. She radioed Elias. "I think she's in there." "You can't go in," he warned. "People who enter Whisper Cave alone, they don't come back the same." "I won't be alone," Talia said. "I'll bring her out." With a rope tied around her waist, a second secured to a sturdy oak, and Elias on the other end with a walkie-talkie, Talia stepped into the darkness. The cave was cool, the walls slick with moisture, the air thick with the scent of wet stone and something older, like burnt paper and dried herbs. The singing had stopped. Only silence now, heavy and watchful. "Lena," she called. "Here," the voice whispered from a side passage. Talia followed, her headlamp cutting through the gloom. In a small chamber, curled against the wall, sat a girl in a faded yellow dress, her knees drawn to her chest, eyes wide but alert. "It kept showing me Mom," Lena said, voice raw. "Said if I stayed, I could see her again. But it wasn't her. It felt wrong." Talia knelt. "You're so brave." She didn't touch the walls. Didn't linger. She wrapped her jacket around Lena and began the slow retreat, speaking softly the whole way. Nonsense words, nursery rhymes, her own name repeated like a shield. When they emerged into the moonlight, Elias ran to them, tears in his eyes. Lena's parents arrived within the hour, collapsing to their knees in gratitude. But Talia knew the truth. Lena hadn't been trapped by force. She'd been held by hope. And that was the listener's cruelest trick. It didn't chain you. It convinced you to chain yourself. In the weeks that followed, Talia worked with the town to seal the most dangerous passages of Whisper Cave, not with concrete, but with sound. Local musicians recorded hours of live music, fiddles, drums, children's choirs, and played them on loop near the entrance. The theory was simple. If the cave fed on silence and sorrow, flood it with life. It worked. The disappearances stopped. Before leaving Cedar Hollow, Talia gave a talk at the library. Not about monsters or ghosts, but about grief, about how loneliness can make us vulnerable to false comfort. Afterward, a teenager approached her, eyes red. "My brother died last year," he said quietly. "Sometimes, I swear I hear him calling me to the river." Talia handed him a small notebook. "Write to him instead. Every day. Tell him what you did, what you saw, what you're afraid of. Give him your truth, not the silence he left behind." The boy nodded, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. As summer waned into early autumn, Talia's journey took her to the Great Lakes, to a town in Michigan where an old freshwater spring had begun bubbling black water that whispered in Ojibwe. Then to the swamps of Louisiana, where a cypress-shrouded bayou echoed with voices of those lost to hurricanes decades ago. Each place, the pattern held. The listener wasn't one entity. It was a presence that bloomed wherever sorrow pooled too long in silence. And each time, Talia didn't fight it. She filled the silence with something stronger: community, memory, voice. Her journal now held hundreds of names. Her map was a web of red thread connecting towns across the continent. She wasn't just one woman anymore. She was a network, a quiet resistance. In a cabin outside Duluth, she met a retired engineer who'd built a low-frequency sound emitter based on her descriptions. "It doesn't destroy," he explained. "It disrupts the resonance, like white noise for the soul." She tested it in a haunted well in Wisconsin. The whispers dissolved into static, then silence. Not forever, but long enough for healing to begin. By the time she returned to Ellery's Hollow for the first time in over a year, snow was falling again, gentle and slow. The flowers over the well had gone to seed, but new green shoots pushed through the frost. Her house stood as she'd left it, quiet, but not empty. She lit a fire. Sat at the kitchen table where it had all begun. And for the first time, she allowed herself to miss Julian without fear. She spoke to him aloud. "I think I understand now. You weren't taken because you were weak. You went because you cared. And that's what it preys on, the ones who love too deeply." Outside, the wind moved through the pines. No whispers, just wind. She stayed a week, tending the garden, repairing the workshop roof, sharing meals with Orrin and Mrs. Calloway. On her last night, she placed a new journal on the counter, this one filled not with warnings, but with stories of hope, of towns that had reclaimed their silence, of voices that had refused to be swallowed. She left it open to a final page. On it she wrote, "The dark will always whisper, but we are louder together. Keep speaking, keep remembering, and never, ever listen alone. Then she closed the door, got into her truck, and drove east, not toward danger, but toward the next quiet place where someone might be standing on the edge of a well, a cave, a shore, hearing a voice that knows their name. And she would be there, not as a savior, but as a reminder. You are not alone. Your voice matters. And silence only wins if you let it." For weeks after leaving Ellery's Hollow, Talia felt a strange lightness, as if the weight she'd carried for years had finally been set down. The road stretched ahead, familiar now, almost comforting. She drove through autumn-kissed forests and quiet plains, stopping only to rest, to write, to listen, not to whispers, but to the living world around her. Birds, laughter from open windows. She believed, truly believed, that she had turned the tide. Then, on a gray November morning in northern Pennsylvania, she pulled into a roadside diner to refill her thermos. The place was nearly empty, just a trucker in the corner and a waitress humming softly as she wiped the counter. Talia ordered black coffee and sat by the window, watching mist curl over the hills. That's when she saw it. On the diner's wall, near the jukebox, hung a small digital photo frame cycling through staff pictures. One image caught her eye. A young woman with kind eyes and a faded tattoo of a hummingbird on her wrist. The caption read, Marisol Ortega, we miss you every day. Talia's breath stopped. Marisol, the girl from San Isidro, the one whose embroidered hummingbird had been returned, the one she'd helped set free. But Marisol had never come back. Her family had held a memorial. Talia had stood with them in the plaza as they released paper lanterns into the desert sky. Yet here she was, smiling in a diner uniform, name on the wall, as if she'd been working here for years. Talia approached the waitress. "Who's Marisol?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman glanced at the photo and smiled. "Oh, sweet girl. Worked the night shift for about 6 months last year. Quiet. Always wore that little hummingbird pin. Left suddenly, said she had to go home. We never heard from her again." Talia's blood ran cold. "When exactly did she leave?" "Let me think." The waitress tapped her chin. "Right after Halloween. November 1st, I think. Yeah. She clocked out at 1 a.m. and never came back." November 1st. Today's date. Talia stepped outside, heart hammering. She opened the trunk of her truck, reached for her journal, and froze. The pages were different. Not her handwriting. Not her words. Every entry she'd written over the past year, about Oregon, Maine, New Mexico, Missouri, had been overwritten in that same tight, looping script she'd seen in Vermont. The ink was fresh, the paper warm to the touch, and on the very last page, a single sentence, Asterisk, you did such a good job freeing them, Talia. Now it's your turn to be heard. It's just. She spun around. The diner's lights flickered. Inside, the jukebox, unplugged for years, the owner had told her, suddenly crackled to life. Not with music, but with a voice. Her own voice. Playing back a recording she'd never made. I'm not afraid anymore, it said, smooth and calm. I'm ready to listen. From the truck's dashboard, the Bluetooth icon glowed blue. A soft chime echoed in the cab. Then Alexa's voice, clear, gentle, utterly wrong, whispered through the speakers. Good morning, Talia. Would you like to hear your brother's message again?